Welcome to the War Zone. This is Scruffy Tales, and I am Scruffy. And in this video, we will do a quick frontline update for the 6th of February, and we will be focusing on three specific locations. And our three locations are indicated here on the map. We're going to start up with the northern one, highlighted with the brownish orange color. The push towards the Oskil River, and then we're going to be moving on into the valleys outside of Terny, and last but not least, cutting off Avdiivka from Hope. But we're going to be starting with the push towards the Oskil River. So, what has been going on here? Well, the Russians have for a couple of months been trying to push into this valley system here in order to reach Kupiansk, but they have so far pretty much failed. They've made some small advances along the way here, but never reached the valley system. So instead, they've realigned their focus down here at Avdiivka, where they have had substantial success and pushed deep into, or for this war, made a deep push into Ukrainian territory. And they are now inside another valley system that goes down here. And I believe they are now after this valley because they can rely on the valley here to bypass, or avoid rather, all the open fields and all the farmland that is so devastating to cross. And in the valleys, they can rely on cover, and they can more easily push into enemy territory or into Ukrainian territory, and eventually reach the Oskil River over here. And in so doing, they cut the vital supply line going along the river that the Ukrainians are relying upon to maneuver forces north and south. And the Russians can also continue along the valley system to the north to outflank Ukrainians at Kyslivka and outside of Yahidne, so that the Russians up here have a chance to finally get into the valley up here. And here you have Avdiivka. This is where the Russians have advanced. They've managed to push into the valley here. This is not a town or a village. This is basically one building. It's like a small farm, if I'm not mistaken, called Avdiivka. But as you can see, here is the valley. And Pishchane, I'm pretty sure that this will be a big battle in the coming weeks, as the Ukrainians will try and hold it, because the Russians, they want to follow the valley, avoid the big open farmland, and eventually reach the Oskil River. And you can see the main supply route, the main highway over here as well. So this is what the Russians are after at the moment. And also, like I said, they're gonna push north to outflank Ukrainian positions holding this valley up here that can take them all the way to Kupiansk. So that is what's going on in the far north, which is a bit interesting since we've recently also seen the news that Ukraine believes that Russia has some 500 tanks, 600 armored transports, and 500 artillery pieces, and what was it, 40,000 troops ready. So if you put those forces into this context, that Russia may or may not be trying to push along this valley to reach the river, I mean, Ukraine may or may not be in trouble. And that was the push towards the Oskil River. Now we're going to move on into the valleys outside of Terny. And here the Russians have been making some substantial gains of late. They started off trying to get into this valley up here, but the Ukrainians have very successfully defended this valley up here. But then Russia managed to push in here, and they have steadily pushed the Ukrainians back. They then got into this valley, and as you can see, they started off with the Ukrainians holding this part here, the mouth of the valley, but then the Russians have made a lot of success and made a lot of gains here. And it's not surprising because it's a valley that, as you can see, a lot of forest, even though it's winter now, but you know, it's still going to be trees and stuff. So the Russians can get in here, avoid the big open farmland, and here numbers matter. Here they can push in as much infantry as possible, rely on cover, and be able to apply pressure on Ukrainian defenses, outmaneuver the Ukrainians, and what have you. So that is why the Russians are having successes in this forested valley. And they are currently holding the ridge line here, and holding here allows them to open fire down along the entire length of the valley into Ukrainian positions in the wooded area here. And in the last couple of days, Russia has also managed to make pushes into this valley as well. And you have a highway going through here, and there's another highway coming through here, leading all the way to Terny. Up here is another highway as well. As you can see, they're trying to secure all of this. And since the Russians have grabbed this valley here and pushed all the way over here, that means the Russians can now utilize this highway as a supply route and get troops in this way and then get troops down this way and just, you know, pump in manpower, supplies, ammunition, and all the vehicles required to keep pushing towards Terny. And Terny is of course important because you have a bunch of bridges and crossings over the river here that would allow Russia to push on further during springtime into Ukrainian held territory. And here we have it, the valleys that the Russians are trying to get into. Terny, and here is the forested valley that is super important for the Russians and Ukrainians alike. As you can see, this is perfect conditions for infantry fighting. Lots of cover. It's a valley. You don't have to be up here in the open farmland. And the Russians can rely on superior numbers to just overwhelm Ukrainian positions and push along this valley. So this valley here is very much suited for Russian tactics and the way they conduct warfare by just hammering positions with artillery and then just flood the area with infantry. So the Ukrainians are in for a tough fight in this valley, let me tell you. It's a bit easier to defend up here, but the Russians, they are in control of this area, so they can move in vehicles and weapons and what have you, and fire all along the entire length of the valley, as you can see, making it difficult for Ukraine to defend. And if Russia manages to push into the forest here, it's going to be difficult for Ukraine to defend this valley, I feel. So, and the Russians are also trying to get into this forested area here in this valley. So as you can see, they are now pushing in strongly towards Terny, and we'll see if Ukraine can hold, but yeah, Russia has momentum. That has to be said. So why is all of this important up here in the north? I actually believe this is the most important section of the front line, and it has been for a couple of months. The Russians have relentlessly, basically throughout all of the previous year, been trying to punch through at 3 locations: here, here, and here. And this is in order to, as you can see, punch through and grab all of this area here. That is no small section of Ukraine if the Russians manage to push through and grab it. And what the Russians are trying to do is reach the Oskil River here, marked with the deep blue. And if they do that, then they can rely on the Oskil River as a defensive barrier. Yes, they can't push beyond it, and so it will be a defensive barrier for the Ukrainians, but it will be all that much more difficult for Ukraine to launch counterattacks across the river. So this will very much work in the Russians' favor. So they want to push out the river and secure all the territory east of the river, and then they can build up forces for another push during the summer or during the winter or even next year. So what they want to do is push down here to reach Kupiansk. There's a highway between Svatove and Borova that they've been trying to push along. Remember a couple of months ago when they made a big push up here in the north? That was here when they pushed a couple of kilometers towards Borova, but Ukraine managed to force the Russians back. And then they've been trying for over a year to reach this small river in order to be able to reach Lyman and then swing around in the south here. So that is why these two locations that we've just been looking at are super crucial for the overall war effort. Because if the Russians manage to follow the valley that I was talking about, take a look, they can reach the Oskil River, and then they are in a good spot to secure this area up here, and then they're well on their way to achieving the strategical goal of actually securing all of this territory. Same thing here, if they push along the valleys, reach Terny and get across the river, then they can secure more bridges down here that they've been trying to reach for so long, and then if they get all these bridges, then they are across and can push on Lyman and then can move on along the river and push north. And if they have a breakthrough here and here, they may very well soon try to reach Borova again, maybe with all those 40,000 troops and 500 tanks we were talking about. So what's going on here, that's no small thing. These are actually major successes for the Russians. And if they can utilize these successes and keep pushing, we will see there's the potential risk of seeing a big Ukrainian defeat up here in the north, and Russia can achieve a massive land grab potentially during the spring and summer. Right, now those were the two big important strategical battles up in the north. Now we're going to be moving on to Avdiivka, a battle that is essentially a battle for propaganda purposes, political purposes, and what the Russians believed to be a quick and easy victory. It was a town that was basically surrounded, and they figured if they put in a lot of effort, it would soon enough fall, and you could then use it for propaganda purposes to tell the world that Ukraine had lost another city, just like they lost Bakhmut. But just like with Bakhmut, the Ukrainians have put up stiff resistance, and the Russians are, or have had for 2 or 3 months, real issues trying to take the city. But as of maybe a week past, a couple of days ago, things have turned around, and Avdiivka is looking like it may very well fall in a couple of days or even a week or two. And what am I talking about? Well, it's this push. If you've been watching my previous videos, you know what I'm talking about. I've been talking about this for, what is it, 2-3 months? How Russia would try and push down here in order to reach this supply line coming in here. And look at this, huh? Here we have it. Like I've been saying for, I don't know how long, they would be pushing down through the forest, through the suburbs, and then cut across through this relatively easy territory to fight in order to reach the supply line. And the reason I've been saying this is because there is a logic and a math to strategy and tactics and what have you. And it's really simple. If you're going to be attacking urban settings or built up areas, you usually go by that you need a 10-to-1 advantage in order to successfully defeat the enemy in that area. So why would you be attacking this big factory where you need a 10-to-1 advantage if you can attack this forested area here where you only need a 3-to-1 advantage, right? Because in a normal engagement out in the woods or whatever, you usually need a 3-to-1 advantage to win the firefight. You need 2 units that will pin one enemy unit in place, and then you can rely on the third to outflank the enemy, push in and kill him. When you're fighting in against fortified positions, trenches, suburban areas and stuff like that, you need a 5-to-1 advantage because there are more angles to adjust to, and the enemy may have set up proper ambushes, booby traps and what have you. So you need more troops in order to cover all the angles, and you also need more troops because you will take more casualties. So in a suburban area or a trench line fortified area, 5-to-1 advantage is what you need to have to be able to defeat an enemy. These are guidelines. Obviously, you can't always follow these guidelines or rules, but you know, it's what you will strive to follow when you go into combat. So if we take a look at this, why would you attack through here to reach the yellow dotted line, which is the supply line, if you can move through here, the woods and this suburban area, in order to reach this area? So suburbs, some warehouses, maybe a factory building, what have you, and then you're at the supply line, right? There's no point in going through all this way or all through this way if you can punch through here. So that is why I've been saying this for so long. And here we go. The Russians pushed down through the suburbs, through the forests, cut through here, and they are now heading straight for the supply line through this area, which is here, the suburbs. The reason why I have an image of Zelensky down here is because this is where he took this photograph around New Year's when he visited Avdiivka. So he was down here, and in the background is this crossroad here, and he was basically a mile away from Russian forces at the time. At the moment, had he visited today, he would only be 800 meters, half a mile from Russian forces. So yeah, things are not looking good at the moment for the Ukrainians. And wrong, hang on, there we go. So yeah, as you can see, this is where the Russians are at. Now you have this Y-shaped crossing here with the railroad, I believe it is, that is trailing off to head for the factory. And this is here, railroad follows the road and then moves off, and you get this Y shape. So this is the corner where the Russians are at the moment, pushing strongly into the city, and they are now some 820, something between 800 and 900 meters from the main supply line, half a mile basically. So this is where we can see that the Russians are pushing into Ukrainian positions. They're moving in towards this patch here and right here, right? And as you can see, sporadic buildings, gardens, some trees. It's not ideal to attack through because there's not much cover. On the other hand, there's not much cover for the Ukrainians either. So it's not the best area to defend on the flip side. So I can almost guarantee you that the Russians will be pushing into this area in order to reach these warehouses and factory buildings. And right, so here we have the railroad and the Y thing, and this is where the Russians are at. And as you can see, this is not an easily defended area for the Ukrainians to hold. And I think this is where the Russians will be pushing through, because why would they be? Yes, they may be grabbing this factory, section of the factory here to secure their flank, potentially, but I mean still, all the manpower needed to push through these buildings when they can hammer this area with artillery and then push through with masses of infantry, basically, and overrun Ukrainian positions. There's no point for the Russians to go through all of this trouble securing this area up here if they can push through here, grab a couple of warehouses along the way on the edges, and then cut off the supply line, right? So no. The Russians won't be going in here, maybe trying to grab this in order to contest Ukrainian movement along this way. But the main push will be going through here in order to cut in here and reach the supply line. So essentially, this is where the Russians are at now. There we will be pushing into these spread out buildings, all the gardens and what have you, to reach this area here. And this is where I think the main fight will be at. Up here, Ukraine will be defending, and they will have a lot of reinforcements from the factory itself. And the city will all obviously be sending in forces as well to hold this territory here. But this is where the Russians will make their move. I'm pretty certain of it. Cutting through the suburbs here, reaching the warehouses and the factory areas, and get a foothold here, and then push on to be able to cut off the main supply line leading into the city along the highway here. So yeah, I think we are about to see a couple of big victories for Russia pretty soon, unfortunately. Maybe Ukraine will be able to switch things around up north and push back the Russians. Maybe they won't let the Russians cross that small river and allow the Russians, so the Russians cannot make a push for Liman and stuff like that. We can always hope that is the case, but as far as Avdiivka goes, I feel that the Russians will be able to cut the factor off from the rest of the city, and then Avdiivka, they have very few options after that. They have one remaining supply route leading into the city, but the Russians are basically about to overrun that supply line as well. So if the Russians manage to push through and isolate the factory from the city, then I think Avdiivka is more or less lost and already in Russian hands. Then it's only a matter of time. But we should cross our fingers and hope that Ukraine can hold the line up in the north, because if the Russians have a breakthrough in the north, that could spell proper disaster for Ukraine in that along that section of the front line. That's all I have for you this time around. I haven't been doing one of these for over a month, incredibly enough, but here we are, and the Russians are currently having the momentum. They are on a roll, and they are making significant advances, strategical advances that, I'm a bit concerned for Ukraine, to be honest. Hopefully, Ukraine will be able to turn this around come spring. So, with all that said, as always, go på marsch, Ukraine, give them hell.